Welcome to Free Thinking 101, brought to you by the Rationalist Society of St. Louis. I'm Pat Inniss, and before we get into tonight's program, I'd like to make this brief announcement. Free Thinking 101 does not play Sun City. Our guest tonight is a member of the Rationalist Society, the beautiful and talented Mr. Steve Best. Steve's going to talk to us tonight about Eupraxophy by reviewing a book of that same name written by our lovely friend Mr. Paul Kurtz. Before we start, Steve, or I guess as a start, why don't you tell us exactly who this Mr. Paul Kurtz is and why he wrote a book with such an oddball name?
Yeah. First of all, this is the book, Eupraxophy, Living Without Religion. It can be found now in some libraries. The libraries are beginning to pick it up. I suspect it's because there's some demand for it. Paul Kurtz is professor of philosophy at the State University of New York at Buffalo. He is editor of Free Inquiry magazine, founding chairman of the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, also known as PsyCop, and co-president of the International Humanist and Ethical Union. I believe he wrote Eupraxophy because of some disarray in humanist circles. Although the term Eupraxophy is new and strange to many, some of my free-thinking friends and acquaintances are repelled by the term. A careful reading of Kurtz's book does help to clarify concepts behind the word, which I believe also clarifies much behind the term humanism. Humanism is a word with a lot of surplus meaning, while Eupraxophy has much less, I think.
Well, can you give us really some background about humanism? I guess it seems like Eupraxophy is a category now that Mr. Kurtz wants to put, Professor Kurtz wants to put humanism in. But what was it about it that led him to want to do this to humanism? Why wasn't humanism good enough for him? And incidentally, I guess for our viewing audience, you wanted me to spell Eupraxophy, and we wanted to put it in the character generator, but I think it flipped out after we got through about the first two syllables. But
it's a hard word all the way around, right?
Eupraxophy, Eupraxophy.
Very good.
It'll be in the spelling bee next year.
Right. The question of what is humanism was the principal reason for Kurtz's investigation, leading to his exposition of Eupraxophy. Many authors, including humanists, have called humanism a religion. Kurtz cited Julian Huxley as predicting that humanistic religion would become a new, quote, religion without revelation, unquote. To John Dewey, religion functioned primarily in ethical terms as a form of conduct. When seen this way, humanism bears many similarities to traditional systems of religion, such as Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Islam, and Buddhism. They each set forth a way of life. Paul Tillich, the existential Protestant theologian, defined religion as that which expresses our ultimate concern. Moreover, most major humanist organizations in North America have followed the religious model, attempting to create societies, chapters, or churches that would perform the functions of traditional religions, even though without their religious content. I'm a member of the Ethical Society, and it would fit in with that definition. Kurtz thinks this interpretation of humanism is profoundly flawed, and I think this book is a result of that concern of his.
Well, I guess one thing you would say about humanism, which isn't true about religion, which isn't true of humanism, is contrary to the assertions of some people, some critics of humanism, is that religion has dogma, and humanism doesn't really have dogma. Mm-hmm. And humanism holds all beliefs, quote, up to objective analysis. But,
that's right.
How does he see this? What are really his criticisms? I'll let you explain that. What are his criticisms of the religious view of humanism?
Okay. Kurtz believes this religious view of humanism glosses over important differences between theism and humanism. The term secular humanism has been introduced to distinguish it from religious humanism. Sidney Hook, Joseph Fletcher, Corliss Lamont, and other leading humanists maintain that humanism is a secular philosophy, is a secular philosophical, scientific, and ethical outlook. Hope that's not too confusing. They deny that it has certain of the essential characteristics of a religion. In particular, and I continue to quote Kurtz, humanism does not assert a God or other sacred realities, nor does it carry with it the distinctive symbols or functions of traditional religions. Kurtz cites Marx, I don't think he's a communist, but Nietzsche, Freud, Sartre, and Russell as precursors of contemporary humanism who have been strong critics of theistic religion. They considered theistic religion to be divisive and illusionary. I think Freud has written a book on this subject. And they suggested new directions following reason for humankind to take.
Yeah. Well, I think when Kurtz was talking about the distinctions between religion and humanism, he meant, well, as long as we're whipping these big words on people,
right.
He used the word fallibilism, which he used to describe the difference. And I guess humanism has more fallibilism than religion does. Religion doesn't have any fallibilism.
Yeah.
may be very fallacious or false, but it has no fallibilism.
Yeah.
But not that they would admit to anyway. We'll just tantalize our viewers with the word fallibilism. Maybe we'll explain it in a future episode.
Yeah.
But one of the things people say in defense of religion, they say everybody has got to have something to hang on to. Everybody needs something to believe in, some kind of religion. Now, what does Kurtz say to those types of arguments?
Paul Kurtz's statement of this question is as follows, quote, "Is it possible to lead an authentic life without religiosity? Or are there some functions inherent in the human condition that only a religious system of beliefs and practices can fulfill?" He states that humanists deplore the fact that orthodox religious systems persist in spite of massive critiques leveled against them over the ages by skeptical philosophers and scientists, not to mention other theologians. They are dismayed that when old religious forms are abandoned, new cults of unreason often arise to take their place. In another book by Kurtz, The Transcendental Temptation, A Critique of Religion and the Paranormal, he has dealt at length with these questions, quote, pointing to a deep hunger for the transcendental within the human breast, manifesting itself throughout history in various forms, unquote. Very poetic sentence there. He asserts that religions are projections of wishful fantasies, the systems of belief and practices that persist, apparently, satisfy some deep-seated human needs. To answer this, like a good philosopher, Kurtz asks some more questions. Can one substitute moral equivalents for traditional religions? Can these give meaning to life? Can they inspire men and women to fulfill their highest aspirations without any transcendental fixation? Can human beings lead responsible lives without a supernatural support for ethics?
Well, gee, Steve, I mean, we only got about 15 minutes left in this program, but you're not just going to leave us hanging there. I mean, these are the biggie questions for free thinkers to address, and the ones that are always really being thrown at us. What does Kurtz do for you? Does he get you any closer to an answer with this Eupraxophy of his?
Oh, I think he does. Kurtz responds to these questions with an unequivocal, I answer yes. In Forbidden Fruit, The Ethics of Humanism, another book by Kurtz, he's very prolific, he outlines what he calls, quote, a thoroughly humanistic ethical philosophy, unquote. And he submits that there are common moral decencies that are widely recognized and followed in human cultures. He further says that it is possible for individuals to lead lives of excellence and to respect the rights of others without theistic pretensions or sanctions. Kurtz states the theme of his book in his next paragraph, which I quote in its entirety. The question I wish to address in this book is whether it is possible to adopt an a-religious or non-religious approach to life and still find human life to be full of conviction and inspiration. Given the failure until now to build strong humanist institutions as alternatives to traditional religions, these questions are all the more compelling. Further on, Kurtz elaborates on why humanism has not advanced beyond its present status. He states, "In my judgment, unless the point is made that humanism is not a religion, humanism will continue to languish. It'll still be in trouble. I submit that the chief reason why a genuine humanism has thus far failed to have a greater impact on social institutions and to replace classical religion is that it has attempted to ape religion. The next stage for human progress is to overcome the transcendental temptation by building imaginative, alternative institutions." We have nowhere to go but up, I think. But first, humanism must make a radical break with those forms of religious humanism that cloud this distinction. Humanism needs to affirm that human beings can lead authentic lives without religious pretensions. It needs to move beyond religion.
Okay, well, that's pretty good. I think so far you've told us that Kurtz is really making an effort to distinguish humanism from religion, and he's presenting humanism as a very viable and preferable even alternative to religion. And he's also critical of people that have tried to model humanism after religions. But I guess that gets us up to this word Eupraxophy again.
Yeah.
So where does Eupraxophy come in here? Is he going to use Eupraxophy to solve this identity crisis for humanism?
Well, I think if people understand it, it will help. And this is just what I was getting to. Kurtz points out that if humanism is not a religion, what is it? He says there is no word in the English language to describe it. He suggests that humanism combines a method of inquiry, a cosmic worldview, a life stance, and a set of social values. He suggests we need to coin a new word to encompass all of this, and he thinks the best approach is to combine Greek roots for this purpose. He says, I have come up with the term Eupraxophy, which means good, practical wisdom. Eupraxophy is derived from the following roots, following Greek roots. EU, that's EU. Praxis, that's Praxis. And Sophia, that's Sophia. EU is a prefix which means good, well, advantageous. It is combined in words such as eudaimonia, which means well-being or happiness. It is also used in euthanasia, eulogy, euphoria, and so forth.
Use something else.
Yeah. Praxis or praxine refers to action, doing, or practice. Eupraxia, that's the first two parts put together, means right action or good conduct. The suffix Sophia is derived from a sophos, which is wise, and means wisdom. This suffix appears in the term philosophy, combining philos, which is loving, and Sophia, wisdom, to mean love of wisdom. So he puts these three together.
Well, that's not, I wouldn't consider that catchy. Honestly, Steve, I think that's been kind of the consensus. I mean, it's not going to fit on a license plate, but there's a little bit more that Kurtz does.
It isn't going. Well,
but really, Kurtz has developed this not into a very simplistic concept. It's not catchy. You really have to get into it a little bit more. What are some of the other concepts that Eupraxophy really stands for?
Yeah, I think he does have to elaborate, and he does. He spends several pages on the nature of philosophy and characteristics of philosophers because this is germane. He says that philosophy early on, as metaphysics, or the science of being, investigated the general principles and categories by which we can understand nature and interpret reality. The classical philosophers attempted to work out a system of nature in which certain principles were considered to be basic. At the very least, metaphysics analyzes and interprets the basic concepts of the sciences, attempts to make some sense out of them, and, if possible, to unify them. In this modern age, metaphysics is in some disrepute because of skeptical critics and the fact that science has expanded tremendously and simple philosophical explanations are difficult to come by. Philosophical inquiry also focuses on what is called epistemology, or the theory of knowledge. According to Kurtz, epistemology is concerned with questions of meaning, truth, the principles of valid inference, inductive and deductive logic. Of course, there are many other branches of philosophy, including logic, aesthetics, ethics, the philosophy of science, political and social philosophy, and the philosophy of religion.
Well, you know, when we're talking about religion and metaphysics here, I guess one important thing that we might point out to people is that humanism, or secular humanism, if you will, isn't really hostile toward concepts surrounding the supernatural per se, are they? I mean, it's just that it might seem that way to some people because skeptics demand proof, demand an evaluation of the supernatural on the same grounds, the same bases, by using the same yardsticks of proof as things in the natural world.
Yeah. Well, I would say that the skeptics, the Eupraxophists, for example, would say that the persons who make statements of belief, the burden of proof is on them. So although they don't necessarily disparage all of these other ideas, they do shift the burden to where it belongs.
Okay. Well, we're talking really about you were really fleshing out this whole concept of Eupraxophy, and there's a lot more, I guess, layers to this now that you're getting into.
That's true.
All these different definitions.
And a lot of it is philosophical and scientific in content. Kurtz distinguishes between synthetic and analytic philosophy, the former being concerned with offering universal or general principles and developing an overall view, a cosmic perspective.
Yeah, well, that's why I flunked synthetic philosophy the first semester.
Yeah.
Analytic was always my favorite.
This is sometimes, synthetic philosophy is sometimes called synoptic or speculative philosophy, and there were a lot of speculative philosophers in the history of philosophy. But since the development of modern science in the 16th and 17th centuries, this approach has been seriously questioned on methodological grounds. It cannot be done independently of science because science can, show where it fails. But instead, it can only be done in relation to science. So it can't cross science, but can perhaps use science to support it. Nonetheless, philosophy in this sense, this synthetic sense, if I haven't lost my place here, is thinking about generalities. It is concerned with root questions and cosmic coherence. Whatever cosmic coherence means, Kurtz used that term.
I'd like it, whatever it is. It sounds like something I need.
Analytic philosophy is concerned with understanding the nature of meaning and truth, and in defining and analyzing the key concepts within any particular field of inquiry. Critical philosophy is evaluative. It strives for clarity, but it also seeks to appraise the validity of truth claims. This is the part of philosophy that appealed to you, evidently.
Don't they have any, I don't know. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Kurtz continues, these activities are primarily intellectual in purpose, and they are neutral in regard to their practical consequences. The Greeks distinguish contemplative from practical wisdom. Philosophy, as the love of wisdom, begins primarily in the theoretical or contemplative mode. There is another branch of normative philosophy, however, that strives for practical wisdom in ethics and politics. Here, classical philosophy sought to provide some guidance for the good life and the just society. Aristotle maintained in the Nicomachean Ethics that ethics has practical import and that we should study it in order to live well. I'm in favor of living well.
That's
I
why
think
you're
you are too.
Yes.
Kurtz further distinguishes between customary morality and ethics, the former referring to the moral conceptions that already prevail in a given cultural group, and the latter, ethics, involves a reflective and critical component. So these are somewhat different. Today, many philosophers concerned with ethics emphasize the need for ethical rationality, and I go along with that, but virtually for its own sake, refusing to make any recommendations beyond this in dealing with problems that arise in customary reality. They're sort of living in ivory towers, I think. This brand of philosophy presents no worldview. It does not defend a theory of meaning and truth, nor does it seek to persuade others of the comparative reasonableness of the philosopher's own considered normative or social ideology.
Well, you know, Steve, one thing that sort of grabs you about this after listening to this for a few minutes is that, gee, Kurtz hasn't really succeeded in reducing Eupraxophy to a nice, slick slogan like, you know, up against the wall, mother, or something like that. I mean, it's, I guess if you ask Paul Kurtz what Eupraxophy means, you better be prepared to have your ear bent off for about 5 minutes with a lot of heavy philosophy, huh?
Well, actually, he gets into some of the real practicalities in later parts of the book. And I won't be getting into that this time. This is more or less the definition, how it came about, and what it's trying to answer, and you know, just why this is being used. He goes on to consider other individuals that are reacting to some of these philosophical ideas. Marx clearly marked a break with the contemplative mode of philosophy, particularly when he said that the task of philosophy was not simply to interpret the world, but to change it. And I think we're all familiar with Marxism and some of the errors of Marxism in communism and so on. Philosophy in this sense has momentous significance, as it did for Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Russell, Sartre, Dewey, and others. These are people who saw some of this practical outcome that could come from this. Alas, says Kurtz, today it has become wedded to the academy and corrupted by narrow specialization. I guess he has a dim view of his fellow philosophers. Philosophy has lost out to religion and ideology, which in competition for the souls of men and women now rules the day.
So you're actually, what he's saying is that philosophy has almost become elitist, and that for the everyday person out on the street, he's turned in frustration almost, I guess, to religion, which is something he can kind of handle. He can go up and have, you know, sit in a pew every Sunday and have somebody tell him what's right and wrong, and not present him with a lot of confusing alternatives.
Religion presents some answers, and philosophy presents some speculation. That's true, and I think that is why Kurtz says we need to take new directions and to carve out a new approach. In other words, he sees this happening, and so he wants to go beyond this. Having made the above philosophical assertions and comparisons, Paul Kurtz then elaborates his own position as follows. Eupraxophy differs from antiseptically neutral philosophy in that it enters consciously and forthrightly into the marketplace where ideas contend. Unlike pure philosophy, it is not simply the love of wisdom, though this is surely implied by it, but also the practice of wisdom. He's getting into the practicalities here. By that, I do not mean that ethicists should not be interested in developing the capacity for critical ethical judgment or practical wisdom. That is an eminent goal. But Eupraxophy goes further than that, for it provides a coherent, ethical life stance. Moreover, it presents a cosmic theory of reality that seems reasonable at a particular point in history in the light of the best knowledge of the day. In other words, he says, you take a stand, but you use the best knowledge that's available to you, and you do it now. It also advocates an ethical posture, and it is committed implicitly or explicitly to a set of political ideas. Humanist Eupraxophy defends a set of criteria governing the testing of truth claims. There are a lot of people making truth claims, and if you check into them, they fail. But it takes, let's see, Eupraxophy combines both a worldview and a philosophy of living, but it takes us one step further by means of commitment. Based upon cognition, it is fused with passion. He gets passion in there. Doesn't sound like it so far, but there certainly is commitment so far. Anyway, it involves the application of wisdom to the conduct of life, and I think that is really important. Kurtz states that the Eupraxopher does make a choice, the most reasonable one in light of the available evidence, and this enables him to act. After all, he says, theologians, politicians, generals, engineers, businessmen, lawyers, doctors, artists, poets, and plain men and women have beliefs and they act. Why deny this right to the informed philosopher, Eupraxopher? Surely, however, he says, one's beliefs should be based upon reason, critical intelligence, and wisdom. Who would argue with that? I don't know. This is what the suffix "sophy" refers to. Wisdom in the broad sense includes not only philosophical and practical judgment, but also scientific understanding. That's sort of a nutshell definition of it.
Well, considering some of the criticisms that have been leveled at Eupraxophy, maybe you shouldn't use that word "nut" to describe anything associated with it. Some people don't think it's such a hot idea, and I guess it really hasn't taken the world by storm. But anytime you're trying to sell something like humanism or an idea that runs so contrary to a lot of the ideas in society, it's going to be a tough sell. I think that's about all the time we've got, Steve.
Okay. I was just going to add that this book was only copyrighted in 1989, so it can't very well have taken the world by storm yet.
Okay. Well, that's about it for this week. This has been Free Thinking 101. I want to thank you for joining us, Steve. We're brought to you every week by the Rationalist Society of St. Louis, bringing you the best in free thought and any kind of thought, actually. If you want to get in contact with the Rationalist Society, write us at P.O. Box 2931. That's St. Louis, Missouri 63130. We'll see you next week.